question. Ken, you had your hand up several times.
I wanted to, just wanted to pursue the earlier discussion about the guerrilla conflict in the West. I was wondering if some of you could just extend for us the implications, just so we see the full implications of inserting either African or other troops into the West. If there's a guerrilla war going on there, and the Janjaweed are fighting guerrillas, well, they're not fighting guerrillas, they're killing civilians, but there's also a guerrilla war happening there. What are the military consequences of sending a humanitarian peacekeeping force into a zone that's also has a guerrilla conflict in it? I mean, I'm speaking, I will confess, with total and absolute ignorance about what how that guerrilla conflict works. So I'm guessing here that if you insert troops into a region like the one you've described, you're basically taking sides, even if you're not officially taking sides, with the rebels against the Sudanese government and the Janjaweed, so that the humanitarian peacekeepers there, even if they're just protecting civilians, are basically taking sides in effect taking sides in an armed struggle. Tell me if I'm wrong about that, but I just want to think of what the implications are here following Eric Reeves' initial point that this is primarily a political issue here, not just a humanitarian issue. I want to see the political consequences and military consequences more.
Let me, it's exactly the right question, I think, and certainly there has to be an awareness of the possibility that both the SLA, much the largest of the two insurgency groups, and the JM will try and take military advantage of any form of humanitarian intervention or any intervention whatsoever, and must be put on extremely firm notice that attempts to take military advantage will have military consequences in turn. And let me say also that one of the inevitable consequences, I believe, of real humanitarian intervention is that Khartoum will have an incentive to negotiate with the insurgents, which they presently really don't. There is no date set for a resumption of African Union talks in Abuja. There's little likelihood that such talks would yield progress. The last session in December was undermined when Khartoum began a major military offensive on the very eve of these talks. So I think we need to look a little more broadly than the immediate impact on military thinking by the SLA and the JEM, which, by the way, are fracturing. Their command and control structure is clearly highly distressed. They are doing what insurgents often do, which is to commandeer convoys for food and fuel. They're not behaving well, and they're not negotiating well, and they're acting very, very irresponsibly, and it's quite conceivable that they could try and take military advantage. But I think we have an obligation to protect civilians, that it overrides any concerns of that sort. I think we do change fundamentally the political dynamic and the diplomatic dynamic with intervention. I also think that the Janjaweed, again, is not a real military force when confronting a real military force. It's a military force only when it is attacking civilians. It cannot attack successfully even SLA or JEM contingents of relatively small size. So I'd say the advantages, as opposed to the potential disadvantage, are it creates a real political incentive for Khartoum to negotiate, and it forestalls what could be hundreds and hundreds of innocent civilians dying in the coming months, and that's simply too great a consequence to ignore.
Can I just throw something out on this? I think yours is a really good question. And at the nuts and bolts level, while it would be possible, it would be extremely difficult to figure out how you insert a force of the size necessary without ending up with more violence and chaos and so on and so forth. I mean, much of the mess in Somalia was created by the fact that the U.S. decided, I'm not sure commanders thought they were doing this, but in essence they took sides by going after IE and thought they were much smarter, more politically sophisticated than the Somalis, and whoops. But I would just throw out a different way to think about what even-handedness is, because I think there's a tendency, understandably, to think of it as to be even-handed and neutral, you can't allow either side in the conflict to accrue military advantage. And while I think that's important, I would propose about it as the mandate and the obligation is to the civilians, is to the people of Darfur. And therefore, anybody who gets in the way of implementing that mandate, whether it be government forces, Janjaweed, SLA, GEM, anybody, is in essence fair game. I mean, that there is the Chapter 7 right of that mission to confront that entity, whoever it may be. And that way, I think even-handedness is much easier to protect and defend. Now, I will just conclude by saying that that's the kind of statement that would cause military planners to look at me and say, oh, that's such a nice idea. But I think that's what we've got to get to in terms of conceptualizing what a humanitarian intervention looks like. Because if we keep looking at it in conventional terms of being neutral between two parties, I mean, what is neutral towards a government that's committing genocide in the first place?
So the implication of that, Gail, is that after an incredibly successful peacekeeping force that could secure civilian areas and villages and stop the terror that's going on there, that if we call that phase 1, then they would stay in place until phases 2 and 3, which would be the Khartoum government negotiating a peaceful solution in that region.
Well, I mean, I tend to agree with Eric that I think if there was that kind of intervention, there would start to be some incentive for Khartoum to
But there would almost have to
maybe.
be, or else the troops couldn't ever leave.
No, I agree with that, and I think they'd have to be there for a long time anyway, though. I mean, you know, the notion that you can do these, but, so I think there's the negotiation, but to take my friend's point, a realistic negotiation in Sudan at this point, to my mind, is there's Darfur, there's also the East, which is simmering, and I think very potentially, and the North, at risk of erupting. Now, I think if you negotiate all those things, what you ultimately end up doing is negotiating down the power of the traditional Khartoum government to something very, very, very tiny. You know, the university president can remain.
Yes.
Because I think that's the other thing. I mean, I think that this is a regime that has proven itself structurally opposed to the protection and sustenance of its own people.
Okay, just let me add one thing. The Janjaweed is not that seems difficult. The government cannot control. It's very easy for a government to control a Janjaweed